Hi everyone, and welcome to our YouTube channel and to our mini podcast series Led by Love, which you may have heard me say in a few places is to complement a journey that we're on together as a church. We're thinking about what it means to be led by love, and we're trying to reimagine, restructure our leadership around three core values, really, three core things about believing, belonging, and befriending. And I'm really grateful to have people join us for the journey and feed into that. Really grateful today to have Rosa Hunt, who's in ministry and co-principal of the Baptist College here in Cardiff. Richard Hardy, who's minister down in Albany Road and leads the Entheos Trust as well, looking to support churches in ministry and mission. And also Lynda, our very own Lynda from Bethel here, who always encourages and inspires me just with a passion for Jesus. And this insistence that it must be about people who don't yet know Jesus. We've got to follow Jesus in a way that invites others in. So I'm really encouraged just to get us all together and dive into one of the big themes here, which is about believing. That we're led by love somehow to believe, and then believing leads us to belong. And I was thinking about where to start today, and I was thinking that often when we picture those two things, love and belief, they're often in very different boxes in our heads. We compartmentalize, if I can say that word, them very differently. But divorced from each other, it's very difficult to see them, how they work together. So I thought that'd be a great place just to dive in today. Believing without loving, or loving without believing, why that might be a dangerous or a difficult thing. And we're all going to be so polite, nobody wants to dive in.
Yeah. I think at the moment, I was thinking about this, but we're surrounded by aspects of love in social media. People are searching for love and wanting to belong. Over lockdown and everything, there was the simple way of finding a partner online, and that has grown and grown and grown. But is it about love, or is it being sold that it's about love? And what is love? Is love, it's an intimacy with another person, but the way that we are bombarded in the media, it's a physical thing, not a spiritual thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Lynda. I think inviting us into an intimate relationship with God, I like that word that you used there. I think that when we think about loving our neighbour, you sort of express it in practical acts or whatever. And I think in the Reformation, there was a move away from that. And so there was a move towards a more intellectual kind of faith. And you sort of you read the scriptures with your mind, as it were, and you assented to them intellectually. But I think the trouble with that, and I think it was part of a general sort of worldview at the time, is that suddenly man, and I use the word advisedly because it was men, are at the center of the universe. So you shifted from before the Reformation, where basically you learned things through them being revealed to you, to suddenly, from the Reformation time onwards, man was at the center of the universe, and man could use his intellect and his thought to work things out and so on. And so God gets displaced from the center. And if you think of the word ecstasy, it comes from a Greek word that literally means standing outside yourself. And the thing about love, when you fall in love with someone, or when you are loved unconditionally, you forget about yourself. You're thinking about the other person. And I think that's sort of what the heart of the gospel is, that we're meant to shift our focus away from ourselves to God. But too often, I think, we've replaced it by another sort of works, which is that we have to believe certain things. So, yeah, that would be my take on that.
Don't you think we've actually arrived at the opposite place to the Reformation? And I'm not entirely sure the Reformation was totally that sterile, to be honest with you, but there you go. That's another story for another time. I just wonder whether we've become so fuzzy, we've become so feeling orientated, that actually we've lost something where love is concerned. You know, I remember Rob Parsons used to say when I worked for Care for the Family, that I don't want to visit God. I don't want to know God on the basis of unmediated truth, because if I do, I'm in real trouble. I need truth to be filtered through love. I need it to be filtered through grace. And I think where John is right is that the two have to come together, don't they? We don't want to swing from a sort of sterile commitment to belief and truth that becomes religious and becomes pharisaical and becomes thou shalt not. Neither do we want to go to the place where everything's okay because it's fuzzy feeling and it's love based upon in a way based upon the idea that love is like dating, isn't it? I'm dating God, and there's a danger on either end really of the continuum. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, because I've been thinking about the differentiation, the distinction of agape compared to all other loves, and that's a real challenge in our society, because we're being told at the moment that love is love and God is love, therefore everything's okay. That it's all right to love who you like, when you like, how you like, and that's okay by God. And this becomes quite complicated quite quickly, doesn't it?
I don't think there's anything whatsoever fuzzy about love, not even slightly. I think that genuine, unconditional love is as hard as nails on the cross.
Okay.
And
but you're talking about agape, aren't you, Rosa?
No, I'm talking about love.
Oh, okay, go on and expand that for me.
And I would say that so the two areas in which I've learned most about love recently have both been situations where I have had forcibly to give up any semblance of any kind of control or knowledge, or where, quite frankly, my theological training has come in any use whatsoever. And so the first one was when we lost our son, Chris, just before Christmas, and just living through that and being sustained by the unconditional love of the congregation, actually. So just before we came on air, you asked me what was the best thing about Tabernacle, and I said the people. Well, the kindness and the generosity and the love, the unconditional love that we were shown at that time was just amazing. And I had no answers, you know. I had no clever things to say about losing a son. So that was the first thing. But the other thing is we've got a thing called a canal van Glede, which is like a warm space in Tabernacle. And so we have about between 20 and 35 homeless people turn up twice a week, and you know, they have warm space, have some food, and we listen to them. And they have such incredibly complicated lives. And again, you know, I have no answer. I can't fix it. So so often in ministry, you feel you want to fix it. Can't fix it for these people, and the only thing you can do is love them, actually, and provide unconditional love. And that again is not necessarily easy. So you know, I don't think there's anything fuzzy whatsoever about love. Not real love, no.
I think it was interesting you were saying it's feeling. As Richard was saying as well, we're being encouraged to feel so much nowadays. But I think a lot of us put up these barriers to stop us feeling things because we're afraid. And what are we afraid of? Are we afraid to trust something that we don't know, that we are unsure of? And you know, it's a brave person who takes that step to trust a stranger, because, you know, God could be a stranger to them. It's huge, but only by consistency from people who know that love, their example to others. That's the only way that we can help other people want to take a step closer. And I know in my own personal position, years ago, my husband he's going, no, I don't want to go to church. No way, Jose. He'd been hurt badly by the church when he was younger. And he had a lot of barriers. And it's taken years, not because I've forced it, but because I've just, and as you say, Rosa, unconditionally loved him and allowed that love to help him trust more. And and he is more than happy now for me to be doing something like this and other things without fear. So I think that's where you go, if you can have love, and love's one thing, but it's not enough unless you believe and trust, and that relationship starts to grow.
That's a beautiful
and
picture.
it's sometimes it's in the little things, isn't it? I mean, one of the things that's really struck me over the past couple of years in Albany Road Baptist Church is the little acts of kindness, the little acts of love. When we were in the lockdown, somebody completely anonymously and off their own back decided that they were going to bake fresh scones and take fresh scones and cream and homemade jam to every member of the congregation. And basically what they did was they became known as the scone fairy. And they and there'd be a ring on your doorbell, and the door would open. You'd open the door, and there on the step would be this beautiful little packed box, and inside were just enough scones so that each person in the house had one.
Wow.
And the cream and the jam, etc. And it became the talk of the church. Who was this person? And to this day, I think apart from me, nobody knows who that person was. And they got to a point where they were terrified they'd missed somebody in the church, and it became this sort of fear that they'd got everybody but one who was going to feel unloved. But it was an act of triviality in a way, but of unbelievable sacrifice, because it took them time to make the scones and deliver the scones and and make the jam, and yet whilst I totally get what Rosa's saying, and I'd be really interested in hearing how do you express love as a church in the situation you've just faced as a family, when there's no words. I mean, there's no words that you can say that, and yet you felt loved by that congregation. That's remarkable, isn't it? And it's a big thing. But it's also a church, I don't think, gets to that point without a myriad little things. It's the little blessings, isn't it, that makes a huge difference. Yeah. So I don't know whether you've got a response to that, Rosa. I'd be really interested in.
Well,
how did they love
I can tell you what they actually did. I mean, there was a number of things. So, I mean, they sent us an olive tree. They sent us many plants. They sent us over £200 worth of frozen meals from Cook. They said that I could have as long as I liked off church. They took my services for me. They wrote me cards. They sent me pictures of the children. They came and visited. Well, they were just fab, really.
Yeah.
And I'd only been there 3 months, so. But I think, John, to come back to your question of what are the dangers of love, emphasizing love without belief and emphasizing belief without love. So I think if you emphasize belief without love, I think that word Lynda used, fear, I think that's a really key one. So basically you become afraid of, so this is what I believe about God, and what's going to happen if I accidentally break this rule or whatever. And so if you haven't got it all comes back probably to what your image of God is, because if your image of God is a sort of transactional one, that I've got to believe this and get it right and believe the right things, otherwise if I don't believe the right things, I'm going to go to hell or whatever you fear, then that's going to lead to some very well, I think some behavior that could be destructive for yourself and for your church and for society. And certainly I think anybody in a position of church leadership who's operating out of a position of fear might get themselves in might do some pastoral damage, I suspect, when you come across pastorally complex situations. But then, as Richard alluded to, if you go the other way and you have, you're not really sure what love is, but you just think it means being nice to everyone, then again, that could lead you into difficult situations. But isn't that exactly what, why it's important to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus? Because he basically is the perfect image of God and shows us precisely what God is like. And so if we can use him as the focus of our belief, then hopefully we won't go too far.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? It's not just to love others as much as we love ourselves, and that was challenging enough in the Old Testament. The new commandment is to love one another as Jesus has loved us. And it's far more easier just to have a set of rules that you have to keep or a creed that you have to say you believe than to try and work out what that looks like. And there's some great examples already of smaller and bigger ways in which we can love each other. And Jesus actually stakes it all on this, doesn't he? And says, by this the world will know you're my disciples, if you love one another, that sort of Christ-like way, which is hugely challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't do it alone, can you? I mean, that's just the reality, isn't it? I know from my experience of bringing up my own children that I could always tell the difference between when I was loving them in my own strength and when I was loving them in God's strength. It was a bit like, it's that old thing about God give me patience, and he gives you annoying neighbors. One of the things I found was how challenging. I didn't realize that nothing challenged me quite like bringing up my children. Nothing sanctified me as much as bringing up my children. And it's recognizing, isn't it, that every time I tried to do it by myself, if I tried to love other people by myself, I can't do it. My reserves run out so unbelievably quickly. And it's only in reliance upon, it's the fruit of the Spirit, isn't it? It's in reliance upon the Spirit that the limitless, lavish nature of God's love becomes available to us and starts to flow. And when a church starts to flow in the love of God, there's just no stopping it. I mean, it sounds like, you were the dam burst where love is concerned in Tabernacle, not knowing this perfect stranger, really, and yet suddenly the empathy, the surrounding of you are just, that's just fantastic.
Well, to be honest, they'd be like that with everyone. It is genuinely a feature of the church. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that again is an indicator, isn't it, Rosa, of the very presence of the love of God, that they're like that with everybody. That's really difficult.
And isn't that's really what we would aspire our church to be? It's family. It's the extension of that family, and we don't know who's coming through our doors or who is amongst the congregation to know how loved are they, and so we owe it to God to love everybody that we meet. And I think sometimes we, again, I remember being in Bethel and knowing lots of people, but not feeling that I was accepted because I wasn't good enough to be. I wasn't like them. They've all grown up as a Christian and had this wonderful life. And that wasn't my experience. I haven't had a bad life at all, but it was as if, well, I'm not in that group, and I would be fearful of approaching that group to be befriended by a group of people. And it literally, from delving into God's word, I recognized the Old Testament, I really find it hard. And there's a lot of stuff in there that and I think I prefer the letters. I just prefer when Jesus talks. I get his language.
That's all I ever preach on.
So I would immerse myself I would immerse myself in the Gospels, because
Yeah.
I think, oh, I understand that a bit more, and then go from there. And actually through that, I started feeling more love from just those words. And then that led me to think, oh, perhaps I can use this to talk to one of those people that I thought was different to me, and actually finding got a lot in common.
Absolutely. Do you know, years ago when I was first I was a very, very young minister, that shows how long ago it was, and the first series I did in the church that I was pastor of, we did it on love, and it lasted over a year. And one of the congregation came up to me at the door one day and they said, will you stop banging on about love? If you carry on banging on about love, you're going to get yourself into serious trouble. And, you know,
like Jesus.
And, well, that's exactly what I said, Rosa. I said, well, yeah, you know, got Jesus into trouble as well. And if that's the risk I have to take, then that's what I'm prepared to do. And they weren't happy. They weren't happy. But in many respects, that's been the sum and substance of ministry, isn't it? You know, people are love hungry.
Yeah,
they are desperate to belong. They are desperate to feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves. And if they're not going to find it anywhere if they don't find it in church, not really. So it's really important. Yeah, absolutely.
It is the heart of the gospel, isn't it?
Actually? Yeah, exactly. But it costs, doesn't it? And I think that's the thing.
Well,
yes, exactly. That's one of the difficulties. You know, people are very reluctant to love because they've been hurt.
Yeah.
And there's no greater pain and hurt than being hurt by church.
And that's why I think
really
sorry.
Go on, Rosa. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's what Lynda said is really important, because love involves taking a step of trust. Like I said earlier, it involves getting yourself out of the way and letting go, you know. And that's really hard, because if you've not had experiences of being loved by people, it's going to be hard to love God. And also you've got perhaps the image of God that we've got isn't necessarily one of unconditional love, you know. And if you look at sort of people like John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila down the years, the way that they've talked about their relationship with God has been in terms of love, and Teresa of Avila calls it marriage, you know, or divine union or something like this, which is a completely different image from the sort of image that many people have of God. Now, I know that for some people that kind of language is a bit off-putting in itself, you know, but it's a very powerful antidote to the kind of strict judge kind of picture.
Do you know, years ago in a sermon I once said, God likes me. And when I got home, Rose, my wife, said, you can't say that. You can't say God likes you. He loves you, but he doesn't like you. And I went, that's funny, because he seems to want to spend an awful lot of time in my company. And I still believe it. I still believe that actually
God likes you.
God likes me. And in a way, that's really important, I think, because it's so much easier to like other people. It's so much easier to love other people when you're all of that sort of, he's topped me up with that, you know. God loves me and he likes me and he wants to be in my presence. And therefore it's so much easier to like you and love you. And even though I don't know you, and it changes everything. It's certainly changed everything for me.
We've got to move away from this idea that God kind of puts up with us because he's so nice, you know, that he loves us, but he kind of doesn't like us. He just puts up with us. Like I say, you know, it's more like God is madly in love with us and can't wait to spend time with us.
Yeah,
and isn't that the truth? Like that, when you do love somebody, you want to spend every minute of every day with them. And
yes, you do.
And you want to share things together.
Everything
you want everything. Your experience is good, bad, and indifferent. And yet we, as you said before, compartmentalize God. That, oh no, it's time for prayer now. That's when I'm going to talk to God. But what's wrong with talking to God when you're having a shower? I was going to say something else, but I shouldn't say that. You know, but what's wrong with talking to God when anytime of the day? night.
Nothing
anytime.
whatsoever.
But isn't it interesting, Lynda, that you felt unworthy to be part of Bethel,
Totally.
and that's really interesting, isn't it? Because part of that potentially, I suppose, is your perception of what church has been like, and that's been true, sadly, so often.
It wasn't. I didn't have a bad experience, in church, but
no,
it was more about me.
Yes.
It was more about how I felt about myself.
Yeah, but don't you think one of the things that struck me about being in Wales, and forgive me, I'm a Yorkshireman I'm a Yorkshire exile, and I'm living in Wales. There is one of the national traits, I think, is a shyness, is a reservedness. Now, I know that's a blanket statement, but I've certainly seen it in church, and it's not that they're necessarily holier than thou or do-goodish or better than you. It's that they're genuinely shy, and it takes you have to create an environment of acceptance and love for people to come out from behind the blanket of shyness and just show what they essentially are, which is amazing people. And I mean, maybe one of the things that when we came to Bethel and we're there for some time was how reserved people were. And how it wasn't until I left Bethel and now I go back that people are warm and friendly with me, and it's maybe that's just me, maybe I'm the problem.
Never,
No, I think I probably am.
No,
as you see, we are reserved people, and some of that is because when I've talked to people, that's how it's always been. When I went to church as a child, this is how you were, and this is how my parents were. I think from my point of view, I didn't have. I used to go to an Anglican church, and that was very staid. But even then, even as a child, I used to take my little rabbit in my pram down to church because that I love my rabbit.
Was this a real rabbit?
Why wouldn't I take?
Was it a real rabbit?
A real rabbit, yay!
Yeah. They thought
Did he stay in the pram?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
gosh.
And he was on a lead in case, but no, he never used to jump out.
Domesticated rabbit.
But you see, I love my rabbit.
Yeah.
So I took him everywhere.
And quite right.
When I went to the church I was in, I didn't understand what I was listening to, because I was in the adult service, but I would sort of stand up, sit down, kneel down, stand up, and then go home and think, well, that was nice, but I hadn't connected. I hadn't made a connection. I'd just been in this fuzziness of feeling, oh, this is a nice place to be.
At least you felt that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was good. But one person, a great Methodist friend of mine said once, you were being called then, but you just didn't recognize that. And I think that's the other thing. God's timing is perfect. It's not our timing. And in the way that he connects with us is perfect. And for myself to finally come from one aspect to believe was with doing Alpha. And it enabled me to ask crazy silly questions, which I'm renowned for, but not to be afraid. But not to be afraid of opening my mouth and worry that I'm going to say the wrong thing. I was surrounded by people that I thought, I can get away with saying this and I'll be okay. But you say, there's so many people who are not encouraged to do that. And I think, as you're saying, Richard, you're seeing a difference in Bethel now. And I think because we're being encouraged to be ourselves. Don't try and be someone you're not.
Yeah. Well done,
don't
John.
you think one of the things that's really I think it's one of the problems of being in a Western context, really, and that's the lack of community. You know, it's a problem in society, but often it's a problem in church. We're so busy. Our life is consumed by work so often, and the little time we have, we think we ought to invest in family, and rightly so. But it means that it becomes harder to be church and be a family together. It becomes harder to be community, and to give space for one another to rub shoulders with one another. You know, because love rubs off, doesn't it? It's not just in words, it's in deeds, it's in body language, it's in the whole thing. And one of the things that Alpha gives really is you enter this group with these complete strangers, and for the next 10 weeks you get to know them and become friends because you're regularly meeting in a situation where you're having to listen to one another, you're having to share. You're sharing your experiences. There's no judgment. There's a lot of trust, and that's not what church so often has become. It's one of the things that we've just pulled out the pews in Albany Road Baptist Church and flattened the floor. It has changed the dynamic completely. I mean, we did a service yesterday where we had everybody round tables, and it was called the Any Questions service. And we got people to ask questions, and then we got the collective wisdom to share the answers, both around the tables and then, you know, for all of us together. And it didn't really matter that it was amazing. Somebody said to me this morning, it's probably the best service they've ever been to because it wasn't led from the front. It wasn't passive. It wasn't. It was about an exchange, and it was really interesting. But it was fostering, what it was really doing was fostering community and encouraging people to listen to each other. Really interesting. And we're going to do it 3 times a year. But I've already got people saying, can we do it every month? Okay, let's see what we do. But yeah, really interesting. But I have to say, Zoom helped us with that. I mean, Zoom helped us in the 2 years. We became more of a church together than we'd ever been, because on Zoom you have to look at people's faces, not the back of their heads. You have to do things like this, where you have to listen to each other because you can't all talk at once. Yeah, interesting.
And the whole thing about questions, I think, is really interesting. You know, the whole thing about are we going to be a church where it's okay for someone to bring a rabbit? You know, those kind of things can bring themselves to church, their loves, their life to church. Is that the fear that you were talking about right at the start, Lynda, that we don't encounter love because of fear often, is that in doing that, there's this thing that happens that we rob ourselves of people really knowing who we are. And that fear can live behind the mask, can't it? But if they knew, if they heard what I say, you know, etc. And as somebody who, you know, Richard, I totally identify, I've got a master's in shyness. It's absolutely instinctive. But is that whole thing about it's not even a conscious thought. It's this instinct to say, well, there's certain things that I don't, and of course we don't share everything with everyone, but we all need places and people where we can completely open the books. Otherwise, the same fear that thinks we're protecting ourselves stops us, robs us of that experience of being known and loved.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I go back to something Rosa said just for a minute?
Yeah, go for it.
Do you know what my favorite Old Testament book, I hesitate to say, is the Song of Solomon? Because I want the church to get back to a place where it is about Christ and his church. I want to get to a place where, simply because of the intimacy of it, you know, it's just, it reminds me of Paul, you know, but I'm talking about Christ and his church, talking about marriage, and it sort of connects in my head, I think, and the reason I love it is because it's so intimate, it's so present, and that's how I think that's the sort of church I want to be a part of, really. You know, where you just notice people's body language, you notice the furrowed brow, and somebody says, you're not okay, are you? Not, how are you? You know, but you're not okay, or, you know, it's got to become like that, hasn't it?
I read something recently where it said 80% of human communication is non-verbal.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, one final question before I let you go. Which is, and they have been prepped for this, so don't panic to us. But if we want to be led by love, as individuals, as churches, as families, like, what's one thing we could do? We've talked about a few small things today and big things, but how can we be better led by love, do you think?
Don't wait to be loved. Love. Take a step and love somebody else. Pick somebody in the church you don't really know or you don't really get on with and go find out about them. Talk to them. Listen to what they have to say. Because maybe the thing that rubs you the wrong way, when you actually hear the reason why, will make you realize that actually, there's something very special and precious about that. Yeah, I think don't wait to be loved. Because if everybody in the congregation waits to be loved, nobody's going to get loved. But if just one person breaks out and starts loving others, it will change everything for everybody.
It's great. Even if it's the rabbit. Yeah.
Rabbits are great. Rabbits are great.
The rabbit's easy to love, to be fair. I think
they're nice and fluffy.
I think you got to pick someone more challenging than the rabbit. But I think it's very good advice of Richard's. So,
I think also just to try and calm people's fears, just to say, look, we understand. I don't know where you're coming from, but we've all had trials and tribulations. And if you want to explore more, just, hey, I'm here. Here. Each and every one of us is here, just so because it's not ours to keep. That love is not ours. It's everybody's.
Become the scone fairy in your church.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yeah.
Ideally,
have you seen
my
baking?
church and be the scone fairy.
I love the fact you've gone for fairy, not angel. I mean, that's
No, I would agree with both those. I mean, I was going to suggest, the same as what Richard said. I think there is no substitute for sort of loving other people. But I think also what's really, really important, just come back to this thing that Richard said about, we don't really believe God likes us, is something about spending time with God. And this is difficult to do, but finding some way of interacting with God which enables you to experience that love for you and that like for you, that sort of Song of Songs language for you, which I think once you're secure in that love, then that makes all the difference. Now, obviously, for some people, that would be contemplative prayer is a tried and tested way of doing this, but maybe that doesn't work for everybody. But that's what I would say. Just make space for God to tell you that he loves you.
Absolutely.
And use everything that churches are offering, like, they'll do small groups, they'll do I know for myself, I did the bless thing with John, and the first time I did it with a small group of us, it was powerful. It was, we talked about stuff I never thought we'd ever talk about. And I enjoyed it so much, I did it again. And I will do it again, I'm sure, because it gives you that space, that space where you feel safe and you feel loved, and you feel then that you can just open yourself up a little bit more and allow love out, but also allow it in.
And of course you've got to overcome the embarrassment factor then, haven't you? The first time you do anything by way of one, you fear the rejection that you might receive. Well, don't worry about that, because you're loved unconditionally. And overcome the awkwardness of feeling, it feels like I'm doing something artificial here, because you've got to do it to do it in a way. So don't let that get in the way.
In the same way you would love a partner or something, you get that bubbling in your tummy, and that fluttering,
I'm sure that's in the Song of Solomon somewhere. Bubbling in the tummy.
It's in the Hebrew somewhere.
It's in there, isn't it? But you can't just acknowledge it. You've got to do something about it.
Yeah.
So it's acting on that. So yeah.
Well, that's it. And it's that bubbling in the tummy that makes you go out and do something. It gives you the confidence, like you say. You had a great phrase. You said something like, if you feel that you're loved, then you can let love out and let love in. And I thought that's a fantastic summary. Yeah.
They're not my words. They're not mine. I don't know. I don't know where they came from. Thank you.
It's always struck me that the two greatest commandments are actually one, aren't they? Because Jesus says, doesn't he? He says, and the second is like it. You know, you cannot love God and not love your neighbor. If you say you love God, then you've got to love them. I mean, that's the whole of the New Testament, isn't it? In you know, in summary, really, probably the whole of the Bible. But absolutely.
There's an ancient commentary on that passage that says when they came to and asked him what the greatest commandment was, it was feeding into this system of who was the best rabbi and who could summarize the law the best and all the rest of it. And actually, in picking out what was two fairly obscure verses, Jesus moves the conversation on from who is the most right to who can be the most loving. And I love that idea that actually he wasn't just answering the question, he was moving the whole conversation on. And that's so often what he does.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, guys. That's been absolutely brilliant. The time has absolutely raced by, so thank you for sharing. It's been so good.
Thank you, John.
Pleasure.
Thank you
Nice
very much,
to see Richard again, and nice to meet you, Lynda.
Yeah.
Yes,
And greetings to Bethel.
Yes, indeed.
What a great church. We've all been shaped by Bethel, haven't we?
We have.
All of us. So
All of us,
it's been brilliant.
I was going to stop the recording, but I'm glad I didn't know. That's good.
Yeah.
I'll stop it there.
Is it Bethel?
Definitely.
Is it Bethel or is it the Holy Spirit? Hey.
The two are synonymous, really, aren't they?
We're not that good.